James Sheets, question, is the new perspective of Paul's view of the Old Testament new or a return to the original view? That's a great question. If you don't know what the new perspective on Paul is, just go read N.T. Wright and James Dunn. I say that tongue in cheek because literally like the whole shelf, this whole shelf behind me, this is all N.T. Wright. The new perspective on Paul, how do I want to I'm trying to present this as simplified as possible. Around the time of Augustine, and then especially later through the teachings of Augustine, the Augustinian monk named Martin Luther. Remember, he was an Augustinian monk before the Reformation, so he's steeped in the writings of Augustine. Luther especially, but others after him, other reformers as well, they read Paul through the lens of law versus grace. So they read that whenever Paul talked about the law, he was talking about Jews believing that they had to earn their salvation, that they had to keep the law in order to achieve salvation, in order to get to heaven or whatever. And that Jesus came along and said, no, that's not necessary. The only purpose of the law was to show you that you can't keep it, to drive you to grace, that you would cry out and that you would receive grace. So that was sort of the standard view, and it still is among many, especially in Reformed communities. The new perspective, back in the 70s, a scholar named E.P. Sanders was sort of the first to really put this forward. He wrote a book, I think it was called Paul and Palestinian Judaism. This is all off the cuff, so if I get it wrong, pardon me. And he made the claim, hey, Luther and the reformers, you're misreading Paul. Jews in the first century, Pharisees like Paul, did not believe that they had to keep the law in order to earn anything from God. They believed in, it's called covenantal nomism, that they keep the law to show the salvation that they already have as God's people. And so whenever you're reading Paul and he's talking about the law, he's not critiquing or condemning works that people do to try to earn salvation. He's talking about the specific works of the law, meaning the identity badges of Judaism that people felt you had to maintain in order to remain in good standing as God's people. And there are different permutations. I'm super simplifying. E.P. Sanders might say one thing. James Dunn might take it in a different direction. N.T. Wright would take it in a different direction. Even new scholars today are kind of new. So everything is endlessly nuanced. But in general, the idea is that Martin Luther and a lot of the reformers were caricaturing Judaism as a works-based law. And now what the new perspective on Paul says is that's not what Paul was teaching, and it's not what the New Testament teaches, that Jews did not believe they had to earn their salvation by doing works of the law. They believed they were already saved, and because they were saved, out of their salvation, they kept the demands of the law. So in that sense, I think the new perspective is right that it's not new. I think it is I think the new perspective is clearing away 16th century questions and ideas that were being read back into the New Testament that were not prevalent in the first century. So does that mean I agree with everything James Dunn or E.P. Sanders? No, certainly not. Not at all. Even N.T. Wright, I kind of think he's not right on some things. But regardless, though, that's general. I think the new perspective is getting people back to what was the actual first century Jewish perspective, or at least getting closer to it than traditional Reformed theology.